in terms of just like what's the most fascinating, understanding the nature of these experiences, if you really want to like wrap your head around what's going on when someone has a completely altered sense of reality and sense of self, there I think you're talking about the high dose, either smoked, vaporized, or intravenous injection, which all kind of they're very similar pharmacologically, of DMT and 5-methoxy-DMT. This is like when people, this is what, I don't know if you're familiar with Terrence McKenna, he would talk a lot about smoking DMT. Joe Rogan has talked a lot about that. People will say that, and there's a close relative called 5-methoxy-DMT. Most people who know the terrain will say that's an order of magnitude or orders of magnitude beyond. I mean, anything one could get from even a high dose of psilocybin or LSD. I think it's a question about whether, how therapeutic. I think there is a therapeutic potential there, but it's probably not as sure of a bet because one goes so far out. It's almost like they're not contemplating their relationship and their direction in life. They are like, reality is ripping apart at the seams, and the very nature of the self and of the sense of reality. And the amazing thing about these compounds, and same to a lesser degree with with oral psilocybin and LSD, is that unlike some other drugs that really throw you far out there, anesthetics and even alcohol, like as reality starts to become different at higher and higher doses, there's this numbing. There's this sort of there's this ability for the sense of being the center, having a conscious experience that's memorable, that is maintained throughout these classic psychedelic experiences. Like one can go so far out while still being aware of the experience and remembering the experience.
Interesting. So being able to carry something back.
Right.
Can you dig in a little deeper? Like, what is DMT? How long is the trip usually? Like, how much do we understand about it? Is there something interesting to say about just the nature of the experience and what we understand about it?
One of the common methods for people to use it is to smoke it or vaporize it, and it usually takes. And this is a pretty good kind of description of what it might feel like on the ground. The caveat is it's a completely insufficient description, and someone's going to be listening who has done this. It's like nothing you could say is going to come close.
Yeah.
But it'll take about 3 big hits, inhalations, in order to have what people call a breakthrough dose. And there's no great definition of that, but basically meaning moving away from, not just having the typical psilocybin or LSD experience where like things are radically different, but you're still basically a person in this reality, to going somewhere else. And so that'll typically take like 3 hits. And this stuff comes on like a freight train. So one takes a hit, and around the time of the first exhalation, so we're talking about a few seconds in, or maybe just, sometime between the first and the second hit, like it'll start to come on. And they're already up to, let's say, what they might get from a 30 milligram or 300 microgram LSD trip, a big trip. They're already there when at the second hit, but their consciousness is geared. This is like acceleration, not speed, to speak of physics. Okay. Yes. It's like those receptors are getting filled like that, and they're going from 0 to 60 in like, Tesla time.
Yeah.
And at the second hit, again, they're at this, maybe the strongest psychedelic experience they've ever had. And then if they can take that third hit, and some people can't, they're propelled into this other reality. And the nature of that other reality, it will differ depending on who you ask. But, folks will often talk about, and we've done some survey research on this, entities of different types. Elves tend to pop up. Yeah. The caveat is I strongly presume all of this is culturally influenced,
Yes.
but thinking more about the psychology and the neuroscience, there is probably something fundamental, like for someone that might be colored as elves, others it might be colored as I don't know. Terrence McKenna called them self-dribbling basketballs. For someone else, it might be little animals, or someone else it might be aliens. I think that probably is dependent on who they are and what they've been exposed to. But just the fact that one has this sense that they're surrounded by autonomous entities.
Right. Intelligent autonomous entities.
Right. And people come back with stories that are just astonishing. Like there's communication between these entities, and often they're telling them things that the person says are self-validating, but it seems like it's impossible. Like it really seems like, and again, this is what people say oftentimes, that it really is like downloading some intelligence from a higher dimension, or some whatever metaphor you want to use. Sometimes these things come up in dreams where it's like someone is exposed to something that I've had this in a dream, where it seems like what they are being exposed to is physically impossible, but yet at the same time self-validating. It seems true, like that they really are figuring something out. Of course, the challenge is to say something in concrete terms after the experience where you could verify that in any way. And I'm not familiar of any examples of that.
Well, there's a sense in which I suppose the experience is like you're a limited cognitive creature that knows very little about the world, and here's a chance to communicate with much wiser entities that, in a way that you can't possibly understand, are trying to give you hints of deeper truths. Right? And so there's that kind of sense that you can take something back, but you can't, where our cognition is not capable to fully grasp the truth. We'll just get a kind of sense of it, and somehow that process is mind expanding, that there's a greater truth out there.
Right.
That seems like what, from the people I've heard talk about, that seems to be what it is. And that's so fascinating that there's fundamentally to this whole thing is a communication between an entity that is other than yourself, entities. So it's not just like a visual experience, like you're like floating through the world. There's other beings there, which is kind of, I don't know what to sort of, from a person who likes Freud and Carl Jung, I don't know what to think about that. That being, of course, from one perspective is just you looking in the mirror. But it could also be, from another perspective, like actually talking to other beings.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jung, and I think he's particularly interesting, and it kind of points to something I was thinking about saying, is that I think what might be going on from a naturalistic perspective, so regardless, whether or not there are, it doesn't depend on autonomous entities out there, what might be happening is that just the associative net, the level of learning, the comprehension might be so beyond what someone is used to, that the only way for the nervous system, for the aware sense of self to orient towards it, is all by metaphor. And so I do think, when we get into these realms, as a strong empiricist, I think we always got to be careful and be as grounded as possible. But I'm also willing to speculate and sort of cast the nets wide with caveat. But, I think of things like archetypes, and, it's plausible that there are certain stories, there's certain, we've gone through millions of years of evolution. It may be that we have certain characters and stories that are central nervous system is sort of wired to tend to
those stories, we carry those stories in us,
right,
and this unlocks them in a certain kind of way.
And we think about stories, like our sense of self is basically, narrative self is a story, and we think about the world as stories. This is why metaphors are always more powerful than sort of laying out all the details all the time, speaking in parables. It's like, if you really get this is why, as much as I hate it, if you're presenting to Congress or something and you have all the best data in the world, it's not as powerful as that one anecdote as
Yes.
as the mom dying of cancer that had the psilocybin session and it transformed her life.
Yes.
That's a story that's meaningful. And so when this kind of unimaginable kind of change in experience happens with a DMT ingestion, these stories of entities, they might be that, stories that are constructed that is the closest, which is not to say the stories aren't real. I mean, I think we're getting to layers where it doesn't
real,
really,
man?
right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's the closest we can come to making sense out of it. Because I do what we do know about these psychedelics, one of the levels beyond the receptor is that the brain is communicating it with itself in a massively different way. There's massive communication with areas that don't normally communicate. And so I think that comes with both, it's casting the nets wide. I think that comes with the insights and helpful novel ways of thinking. I do think it comes with false positives, that could be some of the delusion. And so, when you're so far out there, like with the DMT experience, like maybe alien is the best way that the mind can wrap some arms around that.